do you still feel that you are Kenyan?
I'm Kenyan. Nobody can change me from that. I'm Kenyan. But a bad employed armed forces have created all that. Not even sorry. There's nobody came and said sorry what happened to us.
This woman lost everything she had in the fire, and she's saying now she doesn't have any more. She was selling household items at the store where she was, and in total she lost about 800,000, which is about $10,000. Now she says she sleeps hungry most of the time. The following day, the anger and frustration of the population towards the police and the military erupted. Abdullahi Barre, a close friend of mine since childhood, and a government official tried to calm the protesters and was shot when the military fired into the crowd. He was 33 years old. He leaves his mother, already herself a widow, to look after his 4 orphan children.
رافضة أو وقف الجمارحي يا رصاص طلقوا الوقود يقول ماشي بكي وخربني وأنا استعمل أسكت المجتمع وتابع بنيس وبدك الله يمشي طابلين رصاص تيجي رصاص تيجي ما الوقت تبعث أو كذا لا أنا بقول لك إسكت جوات تلفون بيصير أسوي لك رسول الله بسرعة وصل التلفون بيصير أو إستعمل أنا رحت قبل أسوي سرير تبع السعرات إيش هذا وتون فتني ما هذا ما أنت يكون هذا تاريخي ما أنت تنبأ سدس أنا ولا
إلا عد وحبارة هذا وسمي المحكمة الدولية التاريخ بالكيس مدرسة.
ما محكمة الدولية التاريخ ما
ها ومدرا أو مدرا وحصل أو
صح حصل أنا أنا ما أنا أنا سعيد أنا شكلي لا أسأل قدام
It's just typical of the way. Weird.
Great time! Nice one, killer.
It's just typical of the way we're treated in a country we call our own.
Enemy down.
5 months later, I found myself reporting on the Westgate attack in Nairobi. More lives torn apart by violence. As a Kenyan, I watched these scenes with horror. As a Kenyan Somali, I feared the backlash. President Uhuru Kenyatta has sought to reassure us that the country is united and tolerant.
One national family, recognize one mind, distinction between terrorism and Islam.
I hope this is true. I hope that some good can come from this terrible tragedy, and we can finally move on from the mutual suspicion and mistrust of the shift of war years. I hope that 50 years on, the dream of independence can finally be realized. One nation where we are all Kenyan.
Where it hurts. Good one.
Cities have always been.
Dead man.
They have to be to evolve and adapt.
I've often said cities are the greatest work of art.
Shooting time lapse in a huge city, you kind of get this sense of how the world around you behaves in a way you cannot see with the naked eye. You can feel the hairs on the back of your neck standing up when you reach the top of that building and get that great view.
There.
Metropolis 100.
Hostile down. Damn. Respect. Live one. Down.
joining in. We're going to begin in the Pacific, the U.S. states of Hawaii, where a state of emergency has been declared over catastrophic flooding. This is on the island of Waikiki. We know a lot of moisture here up in the mountains. We've been dealing with blizzard conditions. We'll jet across the Pacific right now to western Canada. Saw a swath of snow for Vancouver Island and Sunshine Coast, the lower mainland. East of Vancouver, Abbotsford getting 8 centimeters of snow. Toward the east, cold air really sinking into play here. We've got some streamers and slick effect snow across the Great Lakes in this vigorous system for the Avalon Peninsula. St. John's could see wind gusts up to 100 kilometers per hour. For the U.S. Gulf states, the southeast, a few showers, coastal Texas, Louisiana, right into the Florida Panhandle, and off we go to Central America. Right now, it's fairly calm, especially for the Caribbean. Wall-to-wall sun for Cuba, Havana, 29 degrees free. A lot of storms. Top end of South America, we've seen continuous rain for northwestern Colombia. Some flash flooding in Medellin, damaging about 70 homes. Stormy zone of weather toward just the north of Rio, but further toward the south, Patagonia, Comodoro Rivadavia, you go from 30 on Tuesday. Look at that, down to 16 on Wednesday. That's your update. See you soon.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Ambition, artistry, adventure. Short documentaries by African filmmakers from
Enemy down.
Kenya and Algeria. In the aluminium village, Throttle Place.
Down.
This is when you really get to let your hair down. And the cave, Africa Direct, on Al Jazeera.
Good floor. Firepower fixing. Take the bridge.
This is Al Jazeera.
Dr. Blue.
Hello, I'm Matheson. This is the news hour live from Doha. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, U.S. President Joe Biden and Russia's
Dr. Secret Bloom.
Dr. Bloom, step out for a moment. Can I take a message?
Pluto sent me.
Harui. And who does that make you?
You can call me Nomad.
If you wanted to sue your parents for naming you, I think you'd have a case.
Actually, Uncle Sam gave it to me. But it's still on pretty good terms.
Of course. American military, some kind of special forces. Secret squirrel, no doubt. Hey, thanks for coming to the party.
I ain't okay. Sit tight. So, I'm the head of a hospital. Find out about a weapons shipment.
I knew that was you. The whole island's been hearing about your handiwork since that shipment went missing. What's the point of you secret squirrels if you're no good at keeping your work secret?
What can I say? I've always been a show-up. Never answered my questions.
How about that?
Come on.
You'd be surprised what you can overhear in a cocktail dress. Hey, and what about my question? You never answered that either.
How about that?
Hey, secret squirrel?
Dr. Blue. What's up?
Secret.
Cigarette. Something on your mind?
Nature, namely the call of the wild.
Go can do.
Hey, I'll make it quick. They make bushes on this island, don't they?
How better we make it to our destination?
Where is that? You still haven't said. And when can I drop by my place?
That's all over, Doc. As of now, you're a fugitive. You understand, right?
Yeah, that's too bad. There's a page by numbers I've been looking forward to finishing.
Well, it won't be much longer now. Sit tight.
The U.S. are particularly bad. What can the U.S. hope to gain out of this?
Well, what the U.S. hopes to gain is some sort of pathway to diplomacy. It's very clear from the statements coming out of the Biden administration in recent days that that is the desired path. So what we saw in the last 24 hours was the U.S. president consulting with European allies. We know he spoke with French leader Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, as well as the British and Italian prime ministers. And what we understand emerged from those meetings was essentially a strong joint stance that what they are looking for is some sort of commitment from Russia that it not only will respect Ukraine's integrity in terms of sovereignty, but also in terms of territory. And so this is the message that Joe Biden is likely to convey. Now, the lingering question has been from White House reporters to the Biden administration, what about the military option? Should Russia invade Ukraine, will the United States send some sort of military support? The White House and also at the Pentagon, they have been kind of holding back on answering that question directly, only saying that they would support NATO allies in terms of anything that NATO might do. But going any further so far has been something that this White House has been reluctant to indicate.
I know her, but I had no idea she was missing.
Yet that the
Becker
US
didn't even
is
know that I
either
was with
willing
the
or
outcasts.
able to give the guarantees that the Russian president
Better lay low for a while.
And live the fugitive life. No, there's too much to
What
do.
we know is that there
Let's
is
go.
a very clear red line for this White House. And while
Do
we've
me a
heard
favor.
the senior administration officials say
I won't be
red
able to
lines
meet
aren't
with Howie for a
helpful,
while.
it's very clear that
When you see
the
her,
White
thank her
House
for
has
me.
one red line, and that is if Russia invades Ukraine, there will be punishing financial sanctions that will be levied against Russia. This would be something that would isolate it from the global financial system. In other words, it'd be very difficult for it to convert rubles to dollars or any other sort of currency. So that is the first sort of tactic that this White House is taking in conjunction with its European allies. But again, there is this other option that is hanging in the balance, one that the White House says it essentially is reluctant to discuss or even indicate is available. The pathway forward seems to be financial sanctions, ones that would be so punishing it would really cripple Russia financially.
Kimberly, thanks very much indeed. That's our White House correspondent, Kimberly Harper, talking to us from Washington, D.C. Let's go to Bernard Smith, who's joining us now live from Moscow. Bernard, it is true, isn't it, that Russia's been facing sanctions for many years, and in many ways has adapted to the fact that it is continually facing sanctions. Is there a sense there that Russia and Moscow are feeling any sort of pressure from this?
Not particularly from the threat of sanctions, no. I mean, what Vladimir Putin wants from this meeting is respect, to be treated as an equal, and he wants NATO to stop its eastward expansion by allowing Ukraine to join. Now, Vladimir Putin has said that when Ukraine declared independence not long after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that was a great common calamity. It's not how many Ukrainians might see it, but an indication of the centuries-old historical links there have been between the two countries, and that's a lot of what to do is behind this. And Russia has been increasingly agitated by what it sees as American and NATO activity on its doorstep. Naval exercises with the US Navy in the summer, Turkey selling armed drones to Ukraine, and Russia and the US military arming the Ukrainians. All these Russia, Putin sees as a problem. Now, Vladimir Putin maybe thinks that Biden can't give him these guarantees, but Putin now has this bargaining chip, the build-up of those troops on the border with Ukraine. And analysts are saying if that build-up continues, then by the end of January, Russia will be in a position to invade Ukraine, although that will come at enormous military cost and human cost, not just to Ukraine, but to Russia as well. Ukraine a much better trained army now than it was in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea.
On that point, Bernard, we are talking about Russia, which is facing significant financial problems in its own right. Obviously, it's having to deal with COVID-19, the spread of that, the problems that many other countries are facing around the world. Is there a sense that you're getting about whether or not Russia is actually in a position to wage some sort of conflict like this? So as you say, is this essentially just brinkmanship?
The analysts I'm speaking to here don't believe that ultimately Russia will invade Ukraine, although they'll also caveat that by saying that they don't know whether Vladimir Putin has taken a final decision yet. But it will be very different to invading Ukraine than it will be to annexing Crimea. The annexation of Crimea involved annexing territory where there were mainly ethnic Russians living there, and it was generally welcomed by them. Invading Ukraine proper into territory that is mainly ethnic Ukrainian is a very different prospect. You would be invading hostile territory, and this much better trained Ukrainian army, although still much smaller than the very large Russian army, would put up a fight, and there would be a considerable cost. And when Russia annexed Crimea, that boosted Vladimir Putin's popularity here in Russia considerably. There's no guarantee that doing that in Ukraine would have the same effect on its popularity.
Bernard, thank you very much indeed. That's Bernard Smith, our correspondent in Moscow. At least 4 people have been killed by an explosion in Iraq's southern city of Basra. The blast happened near a hospital. Several other people were injured. Mahmoud Abdelwahad has more from Doha.
The governor of Al-Basra city has called it a terrorist attack, despite the fact that he has not given any more details about the causes or who's behind the attack, but he calls it a terrorist attack. Now, the Basra province has just declared 3 days mourning for the victims of the attack. Eyewitnesses in the scene say that a man just parked a motorbike near 2 vehicles and left, and then it exploded in the 2 vehicles after the man left the scene, and the smoke was coming out of the motorbike and the 2 vehicles, as it has been circulated on social media. Now, the governor of Al-Basra pledges to identify the perpetrators and to know the real causes behind the attacks, and also to punish the perpetrators or those who are behind the attack. It's interesting because Basra, like other southern provinces in Iraq, has been quiet for a long time, and terrorist attacks would usually happen in the north, namely in the areas, in the disputed areas between Kurdistan region and the Baghdad territories.
Looking more ahead on the news hour, including South Africa's president takes aim at the travel bans imposed in his country because of the Omicron variant. And in sport, England leave out their most experienced player for the first Ashes test against Australia. China's warning bilateral cooperation with the US may be harmed after Washington announced a diplomatic boycott of next year's Winter Olympics in Beijing. American government officials will not attend the event because of what they call human rights atrocities and genocide. Virginia Yu reports from Beijing.
China's Winter Olympic uniforms are ready, and thousands of event staff have been hired. But there will be fewer guests attending when the Games opens in Beijing in February. The United States has announced a diplomatic boycott, citing concerns about China's human rights record. Only American athletes and not officials will be present. Beijing says the move is an act of political manipulation.
The U.S. approach seriously violates the principle of political neutrality in sports, established by the Olympic Charter, runs counter to the Olympic motto of more unity, and stands on opposite side of the vast number of athletes and sports enthusiasts all over the world.
Washington says China's treatment of Muslim Uyghurs in Xinjiang amounts to genocide. Rights groups say forced labor and sterilization are rife. Accusations repeatedly dismissed by the Chinese government.
Xinjiang has effectively guaranteed the rights of people of all ethnic groups. They are masters of their own affairs.
Other countries, including the United Kingdom and Canada, are also considering diplomatic boycotts. Analysts say this will escalate tensions and do little to change China's behavior.
It will have virtually no or zero impact on their policies in Xinjiang or their policies in Hong Kong.
Relations between the US and China have dramatically shifted and chilled since Beijing hosted the Summer Olympics in 2008, which former US President George W. Bush attended.
China is just trying to figure out exactly what all of this stuff means. Is it just political posturing ahead of the midterms next year by a president who's unpopular? Or does this reflect a long-term systematic and structural differences between the countries?
The The US has also applauded the Women's Tennis Association for suspending all tournaments in China for concerns about the well-being of Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai, who has not spoken publicly after accusing a senior official of sexual assault.
The Chinese government says it will respond with firm countermeasures, but it hasn't released details as to what those might be. In recent weeks, the two countries announced visa concessions to help the exchange of business people and journalists. Industry leaders are now worried that those could be at risk. Katrina Yu, Al Jazeera, Beijing.
New Zealand also says it will be attending China's Winter Olympics at a diplomatic level, but says that decision mostly has to do with COVID-19 and travel logistics. But the Deputy Prime Minister says their concerns about human rights still exist and have been raised with Beijing.
We make very regular statements around our views on human rights issues with respect to China, and the Prime Minister's raised those directly with President Xi. We are already not attending at diplomatic level, as it were, and so it's a hypothetical from our perspective.
At least 38 people have been killed in a fire at Burundi's main prison. Dozens more have been injured in the early morning blaze. There are reports that the fire service didn't arrive on the scene until 2 hours after the start of the blaze. The Interior Ministry says the fire was caused by an electrical short circuit. The World Health Organization says imposing mandatory vaccines against the coronavirus should be an absolute last resort. The warning comes as more countries in Europe debate whether to adopt the strict measure due to a wave of new infections driven by the Omicron variant. Last month, Austria announced it would make inoculations compulsory for next year.
Mandates around vaccination are absolute last resort and only applicable when all other feasible options to improve vaccination uptake have been exhausted. They have proved effective in some environments to increase vaccine uptake. But the effectiveness of mandates is very context-specific. It is supported by policy considerations, a comprehensive implementation plan, including provision for exemptions, and a strong communication component for the population.
New travel restrictions are coming into effect in the UK as a result of the new COVID-19 variant. People travelling to the country will need to show a negative test result within 48 hours before their flight. Flights from several countries in southern Africa are already planned. Prime Minister Boris Johnson's latest cabinet Omicron variant appears to be more transmissible than Delta. Let's go to Anderson at London's Gatwick Airport. How are people reacting to these new restrictions?
Well, mixed reactions really. There is a lot of concern about whether the restrictions are enough to deal with Omicron and the indications that it's spreading very rapidly. As far as these travel restrictions are concerned, within 2 days of departure, there has to be a mandatory COVID test, and within 2 days of arrival, there has to be a mandatory COVID test. There's also the red list, which has been extended to Nigeria, the 11th country to do so. The other countries are Southern Africa states. There's a lot of controversy over this. It means that there has to be only UK or Irish nationals on flights coming in on this red list, and there is a restriction also on applying to anyone other than these people. Also is they have to actually go into quarantine for 10 days in hotels, costing something like $3,000. Now, in terms of overall feelings about Omicron, the UK Prime Minister in the Tuesday cabinet meeting told members that early indications are that Omicron variant is more transmissible than the Delta variant. And it certainly is, because the research just in is suggesting that something like every 3 days it doubles in terms of the amount of infection caused. So a lot of alarm about that, and a lot of concern about whether or not having said that there won't be a plan B, and that plan B would be quite a limited effect really anyway. And right now Britain has limited mask wearing and hasn't gone into any other firmer measures. That's quite controversial. Nevertheless, Dominic Raab insists that there will be no plan B, there won't be any uptake of other restrictions ahead of Christmas, despite the evidence that we're seeing a real increase in Omicron right across the board.
So an increase in the UK. What's happening on the European continent?
Well, in Brussels, EU health ministers are meeting right now. They are looking at the travel restrictions as to whether or not they should be extended in the European Union. There seems to be a feeling in Germany that they do need to go into more restrictions. They're also looking right across the board at how they handle pandemics of the future. It's being discussed in considerable detail. Also, the EU Health Commissioner is saying that right away there needs to be more mask wearing and social distancing in all countries. Now, many countries are going further than that, and that includes the compulsory, the mandatory vaccinations of people who have not had the vaccinations in the first place. That is taking place in Austria in February. They're coming out of lockdown on Sunday, and they will continue the lockdown for unvaccinated people. Also, Germany is looking at mandatory vaccines also. And furthermore, looking elsewhere, France is staying fairly relaxed with its with absolutely no major lockdown there, but the closing of nightclubs. And of course, there's also action being taken towards a further move in other countries in the Eastern Europe, and also in Spain. A particular factor here, which a lot of people are quite alarmed about, in Malaga. A hospital saw something like nearly 70 medics, as doctors and nurses, tested positive after a major party involving 173 of them. So that is a fairly a point of great concern in terms of the spreading of this virus.
Andrew, thank you very much. That's Andrew Simmons talking to us from outside London's Gatwick Airport. South Africa's president has stepped up his views, criticism of the way countries have reacted to the new Omicron variant. Cyril Ramaphosa made the remarks during a peace and security forum in Senegal, saying Western governments are also failed to deliver COVID-19 vaccines that they promised to Africa. For Dhaka, Nicholas Hamilton.
The fight against the new Omicron variant in Senegal starts here at a health center in downtown Dakar, where doses of the COVID-19 vaccines are available.
It's not because we have a vaccine that we're immune. We need to keep protective measures and protect those around us. It's not over.
At a two-day peace and security forum held in Dakar on Monday, South Africa's president Cyril Ramaphosa accused rich countries of creating health apartheid.
I have personally really been disappointed in the approach that the rich countries have taken on the issue of vaccines. Firstly, they hoarded vaccines. They ordered more vaccines than their populations required. And when we wanted
Fruit Squad, nice to see you. Shouldn't you be out installing a puppet dictator or something?
You keep teasing me. You might make me cry.
One can dream. So, there's a new list going around Sentinel. A bunch of high-priority targets, all green-lit.
It's promising. Thinking of doing some
The
recruiting?
pandemic overshadowed the 7th
I just heard from Sigrid.
held here,
Number one on
which
the list
welcomed
is a
heads of
Lieutenant
state
Anna
intelligence
Pecker.
officers.
Supposedly
of
she's a
military
deserter
chiefs.
already on the lam and wants to run with the cool kids.
Usually discussions
She
at
says
the
she's got
forum
valuable
revolves
intel.
around greater
It makes
military
you wonder,
cooperation between
What might
Western
Sentinel be
nations
willing
and
to
African
do
countries.
to
But
expose
with
the
Western
outcasts?
countries breaking
You
their
earned yourself
promise
a
to
gold
supply
star.
vaccines and their
I remember
unwillingness
her name.
to
She was on
waive
the run when
patterns
Sigrid
to allow
got
people
caught.
here to
Sentinel seemed
make
to
their
want her
own.
pretty bad.
You should talk to Sigrid. She's holed up in a construction site near Liberty, east of One Finger Cove. She'll know where to
To
find
help
Becker.
the fight against COVID in Africa, China announced it's sending 1 billion doses of vaccines. On the fight against armed groups in the Sahel region, Niger's president admitted that Al-Qaeda affiliates are in some places better equipped than the security forces of some countries in West Africa. Following increased attacks, Mali is seeking help from the Russian mercenaries working for Wagner, the private military company.
that's why countries like Mali, we have decided to go more and more for diversification of our partnerships. We can work with China, we can work with Russia.
Also at the forum, delegates from Western nations reiterated their goodwill and intentions, but countries such as South Africa and Senegal say that's not good enough. Vaccines made in Africa for Africans is what they want. Almost 250,000 Africans are reported to have died of the virus so far. The message here is those deaths were preventable if only victims had access to vaccines. Nicholas Hogg, Al Jazeera, Dakar.
Indonesian President Joko Widodo is promising to increase evacuation efforts after a devastating volcanic eruption. At least 34 people are confirmed dead, but many more remain missing after Mount Semeru erupted on Saturday. Alexei Bryan reports.
This muddy wasteland of broken homes and ash-covered crops lies in the shadow of Indonesia's Mount Semeru volcano. It thundered to life on Saturday, shooting clouds of ash into the sky, swallowing homes and blanketing entire villages in grey. Survivors say there was no warning and that many people were killed.
After the eruption, my house was damaged, the ceiling destroyed. I opened the door, it was so hot, so I closed the door, went into the house, but then I decided to flee.
Many are now sheltering in evacuation centres, where they're given hot meals and a temporary roof over their head. But Indonesia's president says a more long-term plan is necessary. Joko Widodo visited the disaster zone on Tuesday. His government will now look into moving homes away from the volcano because of the threat of more eruptions.
We hope that once everything has subsided, that everything can start, fixing infrastructure or even relocating those from places we predict are too dangerous to return to. Just now, I received a report saying that around 2,000 families need to be relocated immediately.
Mount Semeru is the tallest mountain on the island of Java and one of nearly 130 active volcanoes in Indonesia. People are being told not to travel within 5 kilometres of the crater because the air nearby is highly polluted. Evacuees complain about coughs brought on by the dust and smoke, while many in hospital are suffering from burns from the steaming hot lava.
When I came down from my truck, I stepped in the lava. I ran and climbed onto the roof of someone's house. The volcanic ash and smoke was choking. I felt like I couldn't breathe for 10 or 15 minutes, I don't know. But thank God I was given a chance to live.
Others weren't so lucky. The body of a 13-year-old boy was retrieved on Monday. The rescuers are battling dangerous conditions. Rain has turned debris into thick mud, and the lava is hardening. For now, once bustling villages remain empty and silent. People say they're too scared to go home, in case the volcano roars to life once more. Alexei Bryan, Al Jazeera.
Now it's time for the weather. Here's Jeff.
Hello, thank you for joining in. We've got 2 major weather makers, one in the west, one in the east. We're going to begin in the western now. This is our second named storm of the season, Storm Bera, as it's barreling into Ireland and Britain toward that southwest corner of Ireland. We'll see those winds blast up to 130 kilometers per hour. Then we've got a shield of snow, northern parts of England into Scotland, 2 centimeters lower ground, but the higher you go, 15 centimeters, and a batch of rain as well, up to 50 millimeters to be expected. Now, this Atlantic rain also shoving in toward the top end of Iberia. It's going to have a big impact. So for the northern coast of Spain, we could see waves about 6 meters high, 40 millimeters over 12 hours. The risk of flooding in those winds howling at 90 millimeters per hour. Now, if we look toward the Balkans, that shield of snow is now pushing into Sofia, Bulgaria. It could pick up about 5 to 10 centimeters. And that energy in the central Med moving toward the east and the eastern Med. And we've got a fire hose of rain here for Antalya. I think 50 millimeters on tap here in those winds, 75 kilometers per hour. One is weather report in Africa right now, where it's a beauty of a day in Nouakchott at 28 degrees. Mauritania coming off that win against Syria at the Arab Cup. Okay, that's it for me. I'll catch you later. See you soon.
Still ahead on Al Jazeera, tension in Gambia's capital as an opposition candidate refuses to concede defeat in Saturday's presidential election. And the U.S. is forced to resume a controversial Trump-era immigration policy that makes migrants wait in Mexico while their cases are heard. And marking the occasion, the Brazilian football fans who were offered free tattoos to celebrate their team winning the league title.
Once upon a time, the family fled from monsters and sought asylum in a snowy land. The sisters were so scared of being sent back that they disappeared within themselves. The little boy had a different plan. He would escape to Mars in a ship made of scrap. How will their story end? Witness, Wake Up on Mars. On Al Jazeera.
Indonesia, the country with an abundance of resources, spread far and wide. Indonesia is busy transforming. We move forward to grow and thrive. We balance the green economy, blue economy, and the digital economy. With the new job creation law, Indonesia is progressively ensuring the policy reform to create quality jobs through investment. Let's be part of Indonesia's growth and progress. Invest in Indonesia now.
You're watching Al Jazeera. Reminder of our top stories this hour. Concerns about a new conflict in Ukraine are set to dominate talks between US and Russian leaders later on Tuesday. Vladimir Putin's denied that an invasion is planned, blaming NATO for the need to position its military as a buffer against its expansion eastwards. At least 4 people have been killed by an explosion in Iraq's southern city of Basra. The blast happened near a hospital. Several other people were injured. China's accused the US of violating the Olympic spirit after Washington announced a diplomatic boycott of next year's Beijing Winter Games. Ranking government officials will not attend because of what they call human rights atrocities and genocide. 3 political parties in Germany have signed a coalition agreement paving the way for the formation of a new government. Leaders of the Social Democratic Party, the Green Party, and Free Democrats attended the signing ceremony in Berlin. The coalition marks an end to the conservative government led by Chancellor Angela Merkel. Social Democrat Olaf Scholz is set to replace Merkel, who's leaving after 16 years. Ronald King reports.
4 times Angela Merkel led her party into a general election. 4 times she won that election, and using a leadership style based firmly in the political centre. When the Berlin Wall fell, Chancellor Helmut Kohl brought her into
Secret
government.
squirrel. I've been thinking about you since I took up the fugitive life.
She engineered his departure.
I should have shirts made. What would Nomad do?
And then Chancellor.
Lieutenant Becker, come here, please.
He was underestimated
Where's
by
her
her
Ruby?
rivals.
I keep hoping she'll learn how to be adult in the room.
Let's give her some time. Come on.
But Merkel followed the logic of party politics.
I heard you're in a
Get
tough
power,
spot.
keep power, and get your opponents and rivals away.
I can cross freaking in the construction site off my bucket list.
Onto the international stage.
Life's harsh, huh?
Star rose as she helped broker bailouts for
Stone's
Europe's
not
aging
interested in
economies
destroying the
and cemented
outcasts.
her position
Take the
as a
blame for
German
everything that
leader
goes wrong
the
in
world's
Aurora.
presidents and prime
Then what
ministers
keeps
wanted
Stone
to
up
be
at night?
seen. But it was her handling of another
There's one thing
crisis
he
which
fears.
would shake people's faith.
It's the civilians.
When refugees
Spent
from
most of her
Syria's
time
civil
beating the
war
shit out of
began
regular
arriving on
people.
Europe's doorstep, she opened Germany's borders.
So then you try to get off the island.
Came. Increasing numbers of senior
I thought my
colleagues in her
security
own
clearance get me past the
party
drones.
openly disagreed with
Shocker,
her policy.
they blew me out of the
Her
water.
poll rating suffered, and the
found her on the
far-right
shore.
populist, anti-immigrant,
Tell him what you
Alternative for Germany party thrived.
3 airtight
Many
suitcases
wondered
full
if
of
Merkel was
deployment
becoming a
details,
lame
mission
duck.
records, watch lists,
But then
arrest
came
orders.
the coronavirus, and as infection and mortality
government in
rates
the world
rose
can
across
afford to
Europe, so did Merkel's resolve.
Find those suitcases.
Europe's economy is
Wreck
badly
washed up on a
shaken.
beach at the foot of Bleak Hill.
Fundamental human
With
rights
any
have
luck,
had to be
the cases are
temporarily
still
massively
inside.
restricted to an extent unprecedented for our democracies. These are decisions that are among the most difficult in my term as Chancellor.
Her pragmatism this time meant agreeing vast grants to ailing European economies.
She was brilliant in managing through all the crises. again, not in a very visionary way, there's hardly a project I could link to Angela Merkel saying, okay, this is where she actually implement whatever topic we're discussing actually a great idea. So it's much more that she managed to get through all these crises.
But COVID was the crisis she couldn't manage her way through alone. In her last days as Chancellor, the numbers of daily cases hit record highs. Now she had to give way to the incoming government leaders who vetoed her proposed lockdown. And as the new parliament deliberates, she is just a spectator, looking on as the man who replaces her does so, having styled himself as a male Merkel. Dominic Kane, Al Jazeera, Berlin.
Rohingya refugees in the US are suing Facebook's parent company, Meta, accusing it of failing to act against hate speech targeting them. They want $150 billion in damages. They say Facebook's algorithm encouraged users to express extremist views. More than 24,000 Rohingya have been killed in Myanmar since the government crackdown in 2017. Hundreds of thousands fled to neighbouring Bangladesh. Well, Ronan Lee is a visiting scholar of the International State Crime Initiative based at Queen Mary University of London. He's joining us live from there by Skype. It's good to have you with us on Al Jazeera. I want to be clear about something. US law at the moment says Facebook is largely protected from liability in things posted by its users. And if I understand it correctly, this case is suggesting that Myanmar law should prevail. If it does, how does that affect Facebook?
Well, if it does, there's a problem for Facebook. Facebook was operating within Myanmar, and the insightful speech that led people to a violent and genocidal deportation of the Rohingya from Myanmar in 2017, these events occurred within Myanmar. Facebook's trying, I think, to be a little bit sneaky about this. They're suggesting that they can operate in a country like Myanmar, they can cause chaos in a country like Myanmar, but when it comes to a legal responsibility for their actions, they want to rely upon the notion that they're ultimately a United States company and that they should be judged by the standards of the law in the United States. I mean, I think this is very much the way companies operated in the colonial era, where they would absolutely ravage foreign countries. They would take the economic resources from them as they could, and then they rely upon the notion that they will act illegally within their own legal framework and use that as a shield to prevent the victims from being able to seek justice. Well, the victims now want justice, and they're going to rely upon the fact that Facebook wants, whether they want to admit it or not, making profit within Myanmar, and it should be obliged to abide by the laws of the country it operates in.
Another interesting part of this, of course, is that Mark Zuckerberg, who was founding Facebook, of course, was the head of the company at the time, has already admitted that mistakes were made. Isn't it possible to think that this was more down to just human error, if you like, rather than a deliberate, if unwritten policy of Facebook's?
Well, it was on a massive scale. I mean, this is the problem with Zuckerberg trying to suggest that really this was mistakes and that they've learned their lesson. Because the evidence is that Facebook hasn't learned its lesson. Facebook has at every opportunity denied victims access to even information. I mean, every time there's a judicial process involved that seeks information from Facebook about the kinds of posts that were inciting people to violence within Myanmar, Facebook doesn't cooperate with those processes. So Facebook really, I mean, it might be trying to suggest that it's learned its lessons, but the evidence genuinely is that it hasn't, that it saw an opportunity to profit in a country like Myanmar, and it doesn't want to put the resources into that country that would be given to a Western country, for instance. The whistleblowers from Facebook talk about the resources that Facebook devotes towards misinformation and hate speech in the English language. I mean, 80% plus of its resources are spent on English language, but less than 10% of its users speak English. So it's a massive difference between the resources that Facebook provides to its non-English-speaking users and its English-speaking users. And that suggests to me that Facebook hasn't learned lessons from what's happened in Myanmar.
Just very briefly, I mean, again, we've seen similar, well, actually not similar cases, but cases on similar scales before, and of course, they're spread over months, probably into years. How much do you think this is actually about winning the case, and how much of it is about raising public awareness of situations like this?
Well, the victims, of course, will hope that this is about winning the case. But the broader issue for our community, of course, is that it's important that Facebook actually changes its practices and that other businesses learn that there are consequences from taking responsibility for your business practices, and that you can't get away with improper business practices just because they're taking place within the third world. This is a good sign in the sense that this is a sign that Rohingya victims are still hungry for justice, and they really should be. This is one of a number of cases that are run internationally. There's a case in Argentina where universal jurisdiction has been applied. There's, of course, a very high-profile case led by the Gambia at the International Court of Justice, requiring Myanmar to live up to its responsibilities to not commit genocide. And of course, there's an investigation underway at the International Criminal Court. This is all important to the Rohingya. This is a group of people who've been badly mistreated and have not had opportunities for justice in the past, and it's good news that they're still hungry for that justice.
Ronald Lee, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. So much to see you.
Pleasure.
The US has sent its first group of asylum seekers back to Mexico after a controversial Trump-era policy was reinstated. President Joe Biden suspended the Remain in Mexico program on his first day in office, but a lawsuit forced him to put it back into effect. Human rights advocates have raised safety concerns about those being forced back into Mexico. Homera Chowdhury reports.
Desperate for answers, these migrants have been waiting for months for their applications to be processed. They're searching for safety and a better life.
There are people like me who cannot go back because we have suffered a lot of violence in our country. We've endured a lot, and if we go back, we will die. We have decided to wait and see what happens, and see what decisions the US government will take.
US President Joe Biden suspended the Remain in Mexico program, calling it inhumane, but a court order has forced it to be reinstated. Former President Donald Trump used the policy then known as the Migrant Protection Protocols to send more than 70,000 asylum applicants back to Mexico, where they were forced to wait for months. Human rights groups reported several cases of kidnapping, rape and torture. But the White House says improvements to the scheme will give asylum seekers legal representation.
This program has endemic flaws. It has imposed unjustifiable human costs, pulled resources and personnel away from other priority efforts. It failed to address the root causes of irregular migration. Deeply flawed.
Under guidance from Mexico, the US will now provide COVID-19 vaccinations and exemptions, such as for those with physical and mental health challenges. The first migrants are expected to be returned from the states of Texas and California. This shelter is preparing for a massive influx of people.
We are preparing to increase our capacity at the shelter. We had a capacity of 150. Now we want to have a capacity of more than 200,000 migrants. Because we believe you ordered intel retrieval.
The rain stayed or snow, huh?
While there is satisfied about the return of the policy, some remain hopeful they can still begin a new life with their
Sentinel incoming!
Speak of the devil. Thanks.
It's really hard to be waiting, and now again with the migrant protection protocols. But I think it is a really good thing because we have the hope to get another opportunity to wait to flee and let us cross into the US and be with our families.
The Mexican government has been insisting on maintaining the health and safety of asylum seekers. As the new program gets underway, these migrants are hoping those promises are kept. Homera Chowdhury, Al Jazeera.
Police in Gambia fired tear gas on Monday to disperse supporters of the presidential candidate who is refusing to concede defeat. The Electoral Commission has declared incumbent Adama Barrow the winner of Saturday's poll with 53% of the vote. Ahmed Idris has the latest from Barcelona.
This is the moment opposition supporters say it is fired tear gas as they gathered at the home of opposition UDP leader Hussein Dabo. The tense standoff happened at Dabo's home just across the street from the United States Embassy in the Serekunda area. Supporters claim their candidate was robbed in Saturday's presidential election and took it right down. Incumbent Adama Barrow has again been declared president. His first term came after the oppressive 22-year rule of former leader Yahya Jammeh.
Want Pharaoh to step down. They rigged the election. The results are worse than what was announced during Yahya Jammeh's reign. Even he didn't defeat the UDP with this margin.
Witnesses say the skirmish began after a stone was cast at the police, who then responded with tear gas and arrests. Incidents like this have been reported elsewhere. Witnesses say clashes have happened between supporters of the governing party and the main opposition.
We are not happy with the result. But not being happy with the result doesn't mean that we have to attack measures that run contrary to the law. The laws of the Gambia have provided us the remedies that we could avail ourselves. And those remedies we must pursue.
Hopes of Gambia's post-election period will be dashed by the states. Now, even the position of opposition leader Hussein Diallo regarding the outcome of this election suffered a setback. On Monday, one of the candidates who attended the meeting in his house while the results of the election were rejected, called and congratulated President Adama. Election observers from both the African Union and European Union found no major problems in the electoral process. Other candidates like Khalifa Sallah have already conceded defeat, saying Gambians have spoken.
Why they voted the way they voted is not my prerogative to inquire into. They have voted. It's their voice. If their voice is heard, they will force to accept their decision.
The police have issued a statement vowing to deal with troublemakers, and with some opposition supporters saying they won't back down. It could be a tense post-election period for the Gambia. Ahmed Idris, Al Jazeera, Banjul, the Gambia.
Qatar and Turkey have signed several cooperation deals. They cover trade, investment, health, and media, and were signed by the Qatari Emir and Turkey's president during a two-day visit to the Gulf
Is it a
country.
rule in special forces that you have to be a bastard?
In Doha.
I knew some of these men,
total
and they
of
deserve to be judged by more than their
11
uniforms.
bilateral agreements between Turkey and Qatar were signed just moments ago in different fields, economic, foreign policy, security, culture, religion, and health and science. This came after the latest round of
Many
strategic
uniforms kill my
dialogue,
friends.
Qatar-Turkey
Probably should
strategic
relay your
dialogue. And what that
message to
is
their families.
basically
We should really get moving. It won't be long before they send another team.
Each country where they
you passed your
gather
goddamn
to
test.
see how their bonds
Get her in the intel to Haruvi. I'll let them know you're coming. You're not half bad for a sentinel grunt. You see me.
What
if I see you first?
Share. Qatar has these strategic dialogue with several countries, including, for example, the United States and others as well. But with regards to Turkey, it's been a very active one in recent years. Both Ankara and Doha seem eye to eye on many issues beyond those agreements that